Ever feel like your life runs on software?
It really does feel that way sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah, me too. So today we're going to dive deep into the world of the people who actually build those digital spaces that we basically live in these days, the systems analysts.
They really are the architects behind our digital world.
Right. Which is no pressure or anything, but like they've got a pretty important job. What I'm curious about is like what's the core of what a systems analyst actually does?
So at its heart, systems analysis is about bridging that gap between, well, us humans with our needs and our desires,
Right.
and the complex world of technology that can meet those needs.
Okay, so they're like translators, but instead of languages, it's between like human wants and computer code. Is that?
That's a great way to put it. And they have to be really good at both sides of the equation,
Yeah.
understanding what people need even when they can't quite articulate it themselves,
Right, right.
and then translating that into a language that computers understand.
This source mentions the information explosion, which, I don't know, I think that paints a pretty vivid picture. What role does a systems analyst play in all of that?
Well, just think about it. Every interaction we have online, every transaction, every click, it generates data.
Oh, yeah.
Businesses are swimming in data. A systems analyst figures out how to make sense of it all.
So it's not just about building a website or an app. It's about, like, managing those massive amounts of information that flow through them.
Precisely. They design the systems that capture that data, store it securely, analyze it for insights,
Okay.
and then use it to improve processes or even predict future trends. That's where things like data flow diagrams come into play. They create a visual roadmap of how that data moves through a system.
Like a map, but for information instead of roads.
Exactly. And they use data dictionaries, which are like glossaries of all the data being used. It ensures everyone involved in a project understands the language, so to speak.
So there's no room for misinterpretation in a data dictionary.
Not if they've done their job well.
That's a good point. This actually makes me think about all those online forms we fill out all the time. How does a systems analyst ensure that those forms are like capturing the right information and getting it to the right place?
That's where their problem-solving skills really shine. They need to think about every possible input a user might enter
Oh, wow.
and design the system to handle it correctly.
Okay, so a good systems analyst is like detail-oriented, organized, and a bit of a mind reader when it comes to user needs.
Hmm.
This document uses the phrase agent of change, which I find kind of intriguing. What does that look like in this role?
It means they're not just passively following instructions, they're actively looking for ways to improve things.
Okay.
They analyze existing systems, identify bottlenecks or inefficiencies,
Yeah.
and propose innovative solutions using technology.
So they're not just tech wizards, they're also like problem solvers and innovators. This is starting to sound like a pretty crucial role in, well, pretty much every industry I can think of.
You're absolutely right, and that's why the demand for skilled systems analysts continues to grow.
Okay, so we've established that systems analysts are like the Sherlock Holmes of the digital world.
Right.
But instead of magnifying glasses, they use data flow diagrams.
Right.
What else goes into their detective toolkit?
You know, that's a pretty apt comparison. They really do play a detective role when they're analyzing a system, especially when it comes to understanding how users are interacting with it.
So how do they do that? Are we talking like heat maps and click trackers?
Those tools can be helpful, but they often go deeper than that.
Okay.
They might conduct user interviews to get direct feedback,
Right.
or even observe users in action to see where they get stuck or frustrated.
Fascinating. So they're not just looking at numbers, they're actually like watching how people use technology in the real world.
Exactly. They're looking for those pain points, those moments of friction where a system isn't quite working as smoothly as it could be.
And then they use those insights to make the system better.
You got it. They take all that information, the data analysis, the user feedback, their own observations, and they use it to design a system that's not only efficient, but also user-friendly.
Which is so important. I can't tell you how many times I've abandoned an app or a website because it was just too clunky and confusing to use.
We've all been there,
And,
and that's what a good systems analyst prevents. They're advocates for the end user, making sure the technology is intuitive and enjoyable to use.
This document keeps mentioning structured English. What is that all about? Is that like how they communicate with the computers?
Not quite. It's more about how they document the system's logic in a clear, concise, and unambiguous way.
Okay.
Think of it as a set of guidelines for describing processes and decisions so that everyone understands them the same way.
So it's like their own special language for talking about systems.
Exactly. And they often use visual aids like flowcharts and decision trees to map out those complex processes and decisions.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see the appeal. I'm a very visual learner myself. So once they've got all their ducks in a row, what's the next step? Do they present their findings in a big report or?
That's right. They put together what's called a system proposal. It's a comprehensive document that outlines the problem they're trying to solve,
Okay.
their proposed solution, the benefits of implementing that solution, and, of course, the costs.
Sounds like a pretty important document. Who are they presenting this to?
It could be to a client, a manager, or a team of stakeholders who ultimately make the decision about whether or not to move forward with the project.
So they need to be persuasive as well as analytical?
Absolutely. They need to be able to communicate their ideas effectively and convince others of the value of their work.
Which makes sense, because if you've got this brilliant solution, but you can't get buy-in from the people holding the purse strings,
Right.
it's not going to go very far.
You hit the nail on the head. Communication and collaboration are key skills for any successful systems analyst.
So they've, like, cracked the case, presented their findings, gotten the green light. What happens next? Does the systems analyst, like, get to build the whole thing from the ground up?
Well, they've laid the groundwork,
Right.
but the actual building process usually involves a whole team of software developers.
Right. The programmers who make the magic happen.
Yeah.
But the systems analyst isn't just, like, kicking back at this point, are they?
Definitely not. They move into a different phase, one of like guidance and collaboration.
Okay.
They work really closely with the developers to ensure the system is being built according to their specifications
Yeah.
and that it aligns with all those user needs that they've identified.
So they're like the liaison between the tech folks and everyone else.
Exactly. They speak both languages, so to speak. They make sure that everyone is on the same page and that the final product meets the needs of all the stakeholders.
And I'm guessing there's a lot of testing involved at this stage too, right?
Mm-hmm.
To make
Yeah.
sure everything actually works as it should.
Absolutely. Testing is a critical part of the software development lifecycle.
Right.
The systems analyst will be involved in designing those test cases,
Okay.
analyzing the results,
Yeah.
and working with the developers to address any bugs or glitches that are discovered.
It's like a final quality control check before the big launch.
You could say that. And even after the system is up and running, the work of a systems analyst isn't necessarily over.
Really?
Like,
What else is there to do once it's launched? I would think that's like the finish line.
well, they'll want to monitor how well the system is performing,
Okay.
gather feedback from users,
Right.
and identify any areas for improvement or updates. Technology is constantly evolving, so systems need to adapt and improve over time, too.
It's like a continuous feedback loop. Always refining, always optimizing.
Exactly. And as they go through this process, they'll be thinking about those future trends we touched upon earlier,
Right.
like open source software and the growing role of AI.
Right. Open source, that sounds like a fascinating development in the software world. What impact is that having on the work of a systems analyst?
It's a game changer in a lot of ways. With open source, you have this community of developers from all over the world contributing to a project.
Oh, wow.
This can lead to faster innovation, more robust software,
Okay.
and a greater emphasis on collaboration and knowledge sharing.
So instead of everyone building their own thing from scratch, they're building upon like a shared foundation.
Exactly. And that shared knowledge base is constantly evolving and improving.
Wow.
For a systems analyst, this means having access to a wider range of tools and resources,
Okay.
as well as being able to tap into the expertise of a global community.
That's incredible. It really highlights how important adaptability and continuous learning are in this field.
Yeah,
Like you can never stop learning, right?
absolutely. A good systems analyst is never content with the status quo.
Right.
They're always looking for ways to do things better, more efficiently,
Yeah.
and with a greater understanding of how technology can be harnessed to solve those real-world problems.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. We've gone from data dictionaries to open source and everything in between. I feel like I have a whole new appreciation for the work that goes into creating the systems that we rely on every single day.
And remember, those systems are only going to become more complex and more integrated into our lives as we move forward. The role of the systems analyst is only going to become more critical.
Well, listeners, if you're looking for a field that's both challenging and rewarding, where you can truly make a difference in how the world interacts with technology, systems analysis might just be your calling. And that's a wrap on a deep dive into the world of systems analysis. We'll catch you next time on the Deep Dive, where we'll unpack another fascinating topic. Until then, happy exploring.
All right, so systems analysis. Looks like we're really diving deep into this today. I had a peek at your notes and wow, you've been digging into some serious organizational structures. Don't worry, we'll unpack it all for you.
Yeah, it's a bit like, trying to understand the whole blueprint of a city instead of just figuring out how to get down one street, isn't it?
That is a great analogy. And speaking of blueprints, one of the first things I noticed in your notes is this whole concept that everything is a system. Okay, I get how a company can be a system, but you even have like my morning coffee routine jotted down here. Is that really a system too?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about it this way. Your coffee routine, it's got inputs, it's got processes, it's got outputs, right? You've got your coffee beans as the input, the grinding, the brewing, all of that. Those are your processes. And then that delicious cup of coffee you end up with, well, that's your output. And just like in a complex organization, each step in your coffee routine impacts the next.
Okay, I'm starting to see it. So let's say we take one of the business processes you've got in your notes here. How about the way a team handles customer orders? How could we use this inputs and outputs idea to actually visualize that as a system?
Perfect example. So let's break it down. The input, that's your customer placing an order, right?
Yeah.
Then you've got a whole bunch of interconnected processing.
Wow.
Processing the order, checking the inventory, packaging it all up, and finally shipping it out. And the output, that's a successful delivery of that product and hopefully a happy customer.
And just like my coffee routine, if any one part of that system breaks down, well, the whole thing can get thrown off pretty quickly.
Exactly. Imagine a delay in just one of those processes. Let's say there's a sudden inventory shortage, or maybe a shipping issue comes up. It creates this
Yeah.
ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
Impacting the entire chain and ultimately affecting that customer experience we were talking about.
Okay, yeah, now it's all starting to click into place. But it's not just about those internal workings of the organization, is it? You mentioned that organizations are kind of like ecosystems. What did you mean by that?
Well, just like an ecosystem out in nature, an organization doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It's constantly adapting to all these external factors.
Yeah.
Market shifts, new technologies, even things like changes in what we value as a society.
So to bring back that customer order example, what would be an example of an external factor that could really shake things up for a business like that?
Imagine this, a sudden surge in online shopping because of, I don't know, let's say some unforeseen circumstances like we saw a while back. Now imagine that your organization, they've always relied pretty heavily on in-person sales, right? Suddenly they're scrambling. They need to adapt their systems, their logistics, even their entire marketing strategy to thrive in this new environment. That right there, that's the ecosystem at play.
Makes sense. And I see here you even mentioned remote workforces as an external factor that's been really reshaping how organizations function.
Absolutely. The whole rise of remote work, it's forced organizations to really reevaluate their approach to, well, just about everything. Communication, collaboration, even how they build social connections between employees. It's not just about having the right software or video conferencing tools. It's about creating these systems that can actually foster a sense of belonging and purpose, even when everyone's working virtually.
That's so interesting. And I bet those systems probably look different for every organization, right? Depending on the industry, the company culture, even just the size of the team.
You hit the nail on the head. There's no one-size-fits-all solution here, which is why for systems analysts, really understanding the specific needs and the challenges of each individual organization within its own unique ecosystem, that's crucial.
Now, in your notes, you mentioned something called ER diagrams. I'll admit, the visual learner in me is pretty intrigued. How can these diagrams help us make sense of all these relationships we've been talking about?
Okay, picture this. You're trying to build a house, right? But instead of having blueprints, all you have is this really long list of materials and maybe some vague instructions. Can you imagine the chaos?
Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for disaster to me, trying to build a house with no real plan.
Exactly. And that is precisely where these ER diagrams come in. ER, it stands for entity relationship, by the way. They're like blueprints for your systems. They visually map out all the different entities, all the different pieces of the system, and how they all connect to each other.
So let's use that example from my notes again. Say we're trying to map out that customer order process. What kind of entities would we actually be looking at in this ER diagram?
Well, you'd have entities like, let's see, customer, obviously. Order, product, inventory, maybe even payment would be an entity in this case. Each one of those represents a key piece of the whole system.
And the diagram, it shows how they all relate to one another, right? So like A customer places an order. That order involves a product, which is tracked in the inventory.
Exactly. You've got it. It's all about making those connections visual, really
Okay.
clear to see the structure of the whole system laid out right in front of you. Oh, and speaking of making things clear, we've got to talk about use cases.
Right. I had those jotted down too. They sound a little bit, I don't know, kind of like something out of a detective movie, don't they?
Well, they do involve a little bit of investigation, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
Use cases are how we really understand how, well, how users are actually interacting with a system.
Hmm.
You can think of it this way. If the ER diagram is like the blueprint of the house, the use case is like walking through that house.
Hmm.
You're seeing how people actually move through the rooms, how they use the furniture, even where there might be some potential bottlenecks.
Okay. Okay. I like that. So give me an example. How would a use case play out in, say, an online store, for example?
Okay, so let's imagine you're a customer and you're on this website, an online bookstore, let's say, and you're trying to buy a book. The use case would outline each and every step of your journey right from the beginning. You're browsing the website, searching for that specific book, adding it to your cart, entering all your payment information, and then finally receiving that confirmation email.
So it's not just about whether the website can, like, technically process the purchase, but how user-friendly that whole experience is, how efficient it is from the customer's point of view.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay.
And by mapping out those use cases, we can actually start to identify those potential pain points, those little hiccups in the system. We can find ways to streamline the process and ultimately make the experience, smoother, more enjoyable for the user.
This is really starting to make a lot of sense now. It's like
Yeah.
we're not just looking at the individual parts of a machine anymore, but like how they all work together and, more importantly, how people are actually interacting with those parts, right?
Exactly. And that's the beauty of these visual models, your ER diagrams and your use cases. They provide this shared language that everyone in the organization can understand.
Oh, tell me about it. I can't tell you how many times I've been in meetings and it feels like everyone is speaking a completely different language.
I hear you. But when everyone is, literally looking at the same picture of the system, when they can all visualize it in the same way, well, it just cuts down on that miscommunication. It speeds up the problem-solving process, and it makes it a whole lot easier to actually implement any new systems when you decide you need them.
Right. Okay. So we've got our blueprints figured out. We've walked through our systems. But what about the actual people who are living and working in these organizational houses we keep talking about? I noticed in your notes you mentioned something about organizational subcultures. And I've got to admit, I'm a little curious about that.
Ah, yes. Now we're getting to the really interesting stuff.
Hmm.
Because just like any society, really, organizations are made up of all these different groups of people, and each one of those groups has its own set of, norms, values, communication styles, all of that. You've got your sales teams over here, your engineering teams over there, your marketing gurus doing their own thing. And even within those departments, even within those teams, you'll find all these smaller subcultures, each with its own, let's say, its own unique vibe.
So it's like, what, different neighborhoods within the same city, each one with its own distinct character, its own way of doing things.
Precisely. You wouldn't expect the same, social customs to fly in a bustling marketplace that you'd find in a quiet library, right? And it's the same thing in an organization. Understanding these subcultural differences, it's not just some interesting side note. It's actually essential for systems analysts.
Because if you try to implement a system that totally clashes with the existing culture of a team, well, it's probably going to blow up in your face, isn't it?
100%. It would be like, I don't know, trying to install some like high-tech security system in a commune where everyone values having open doors and shared spaces. See what I mean? No matter how amazing the technology is, it's not going to be effective if it doesn't fit in with the values and the work styles of the people who actually have to use it every day.
So how do you actually do it? How can systems analysts sort of navigate these subcultural differences without stepping on anyone's toes? It seems like a pretty delicate dance.
You're right. It is. It's all about observation, empathy, and, really clear communication. You have to understand the unspoken rules, the way people prefer to communicate, even the decision-making processes of each group.
So it's not just about the technical stuff, the nuts and bolts of a system. It's also about how well it integrates with the human element, the people side of an organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that human element, that integration, It becomes even more critical when you start thinking about all the different levels of management within an organization.
Oh, right. I've got that flagged in my notes too. How do the information needs of like the different management levels actually come into play when you're analyzing systems?
Okay, imagine this. You're climbing a mountain. So at the base camp, you're going to need really detailed maps, right? You need all your supplies for that, immediate part of the journey. But as you start to climb higher, as you ascend that mountain, your perspective changes,
Yeah.
right? It gets wider.
Yeah.
And you need different tools, different information to guide your path.
Okay, this is good. This is good. So break it down for me. What are those different levels of information needs?
Okay, so at the very bottom, at the ground level, you've got your operational management. These are your frontline workers, the folks who are dealing with the day-to-day tasks, the everyday stuff. And they need information that's very specific, very detailed, real-time, and most importantly, action-oriented.
So, like in our online bookstore example, these would be the folks who need to know if a specific book is in stock at that exact moment, what the shipping times look like, all of that.
It's exactly. Inventory levels, delivery schedules, you got it. They're living in that world, in the weeds of all those little details. Then you've got your middle management. They need more of a balance, a mix of detailed data, but also those summarized reports. They're the ones looking for trends, analyzing performance, making those tactical decisions that keep things running smoothly.
So they're using that operational data, that ground level data, to make those bigger picture decisions, but they're still pretty hands-on, right?
You got it. They're the bridge between those day-to-day operations and that, long-term vision. And then finally, we reach the summit, the strategic management level. That's right, the strategic management. Those are your CEOs, your executives, the folks who are setting the overall direction for the entire company. They're the ones with their eyes on the horizon.
So they need that big picture view.
Absolutely. They need information that's, very summarized, very high level. They're focused on those external factors, things like, let's see, market trends, competitor analysis, long-term projections. Think of it like the view from the top of the mountain, right? You can see for miles, but you're not getting bogged down in every little twist and turn of the trail below.
Wow. Okay, that really paints a clear picture. It's like this whole network, right? The way information flows through an organization, like all these little streams and rivers,
Yeah.
eventually leading to the ocean.
I like that analogy. That's a good one. And understanding these different levels, these different needs for information, well, it's just so essential if you're designing systems that are actually going to work, that are going to effectively serve the entire organization from, the base camp all the way up to the summit.
Wow, this is really making me rethink how I see organizations.
It's like you've been handed a new pair of glasses.
Right.
You're suddenly noticing those underlying structures, those information flows, the way technology and human behavior, they're all intertwined. It's like this intricate dance.
Yeah, you're right. It is. I feel like I'm not just seeing the individual parts anymore, but the whole interconnected system.
And that is precisely what makes systems analysis so fascinating and honestly so valuable. It's all about understanding that bigger picture, the way everything influences everything else.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about, especially when it comes to my own organization.
Oh, yeah. Well, since you brought it up, have any initial thoughts come to mind, about how this new understanding of, let's say, systems and subcultures, how that might change your approach to things at work?
Honestly. Yeah, I think I might need to pay more attention to those subcultural dynamics you were talking about. Like maybe the reason that new project management system we tried to implement, maybe the reason that didn't go over so well in my department is because we didn't really stop to consider how my team actually prefers to communicate and collaborate. We didn't think about those existing workflows.
You see, that's a perfect example. That's a great insight. And it really highlights how important that human element is. Successful implementation of any new system, it's not just about the technology itself. It's about how well it aligns with the people who have to use it, their workflows, their communication styles, even those unspoken rules that every team has. Yeah, the ones that really govern how they operate.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, it's like trying to plant a flower without even bothering to understand what kind of soil it needs or how much sunlight it needs to thrive.
Yeah.
You can have the most beautiful flower in the world, but if you don't create the right environment, well, it's not going to last very long, is it?
What a perfect analogy. And just like a good gardener, they take the time to learn what each plant needs. Systems analysts, they have to approach every organization, every department, even every team with that same, That same level of sensitivity and awareness.
Wow, this has been such an eye-opening conversation, I gotta say. I feel like I've been given this whole new toolkit. Like now I can actually start to understand not just how organizations work, but how to actually navigate them in a way that makes sense.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
And remember, this is really just the beginning of your journey. The
Yeah.
more you observe, the more questions you ask, the deeper that understanding of these systems will become.
Well, I am definitely feeling inspired to keep digging deeper. Thank you. Thank you so much for guiding me through all of this, through this fascinating deep dive. It's been great.
The pleasure was all mine. Just remember, keep those systems thinking caps on, okay?
I will. And for all of you joining us on this deep dive, we hope you'll join us again next time as we take another deep dive into a new topic. Until then, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep asking those thought-provoking questions.
Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive in. Today we're tackling something crucial in tech, and it's surprisingly human-centered. We're talking about getting inside users' heads, really understanding how people interact with the technology we use every day.
It's about going beyond the surface, you know? We're
Yeah.
not just looking at numbers on a screen. We're trying to understand the why behind user behavior.
Exactly. And that's where user interviews come in, right?
Mm,
Our trusty guides, Kendall and Kendall, really emphasize the power of opinions in their research. They even go so far as to say that opinions can be more revealing than facts. Now, I'm all for data-driven decisions, but how can opinions be that powerful?
Think of it this way. Let's say your data tells you people aren't using a new feature you launched. That's a problem, right? But the data alone doesn't tell you why.
You're just left scratching your head wondering what went wrong.
Exactly. Maybe the design is confusing, maybe it's buried too deep in the app, or maybe people are just intimidated by it.
So it's like those opinions and feelings hold the key to unlocking those aha moments, those hidden reasons behind the data.
Precisely. And it goes even deeper than that. Imagine you're trying to improve employee satisfaction with a new software system at work. By uncovering how people feel about using it, you start to see the company culture reflected back at you.
You mean like, are people excited about new tech, or are they dreading having to learn something new?
Yes. And do they feel supported during the transition? Are their concerns being heard? These emotional insights, these opinions can make or break the success of any project.
It's amazing how much we miss when we only focus on the what and not the why. But how do we actually tap into this gold mine of user insight? It's not like we can just show up at someone's desk and say, tell me your deepest feelings about this software.
Well, you could try that, but there are definitely more, shall we say, structured approaches. Kendall and Kendall walk us through the art of conducting user interviews, and it all starts with preparation.
So, no more barging into offices then.
Yeah. Definitely not. Just like you wouldn't go into an important meeting unprepared, you don't walk into a user interview without doing your homework. We're talking about understanding the company, their industry, their competitors, basically anything that gives you context.
It's like prepping for a first date. You do your research, maybe stalk them on LinkedIn a little to make sure you ask insightful questions.
Exactly. The more you know going in, the better you'll be at asking those laser-focused questions that get to the heart of the user experience.
Okay, so we've done our homework. We're feeling prepped and ready to chat. What's next? How do we make sure we're talking to the right people? Finding the right users, that's key, isn't it? It's like, we don't want just anyone's opinion on that new project management software, do we?
Exactly. You need a good mix, right? People who really know their stuff and those who are maybe just starting out. Each brings something important to the table.
Like different pieces of a puzzle, right?
Yeah.
You need them all to see the full picture. Speaking of pictures, Kendall and Kendall use this interesting analogy, talking about the interview process, like a fishing expedition. What's that all about?
Okay, so imagine you're by the lake, all set up, fishing rod in hand. You probably have something specific in mind, right? Like, today I'm catching a big old trout.
Or maybe you're going for that elusive catfish everyone's always talking about.
Right. But sometimes you reel in your line and it's not a fish at all. It's an old boot.
Huh. Not quite what you were expecting.
Exactly. But hey, it's a story, right? And those unexpected catches in user interviews, those can be the most valuable. You go in with your list of questions, but you got to be ready to stray off course a little.
So it's like being present in the moment, listening, really listening to what the user is saying, and being open to those aha moments that might come out of left field.
Right. It's not just about sticking to your script. It's about uncovering those hidden gems you didn't even know were there. And speaking of uncovering things, Kendall and Kendall talk about the power of using both open-ended and closed questions. Now, I know we've all encountered these in surveys and such, but what's the real difference?
Yeah, I'm always curious about that. Like, when is it better to give someone a multiple choice question versus just letting them tell me what they think in their own words?
Well, think of open-ended questions like those big open fields where you can just run free.
Yeah.
They give the person being interviewed space to really express themselves, to answer in their own words. You get those rich, detailed responses that way.
So it's not just a simple yes or no.
Yeah.
It's giving them the freedom to tell their story, paint a picture with their words.
Exactly. Now, closed questions, those are more like a well-marked path, you know? You're guiding the interviewee toward more specific, concise answers. Often it's a simple yes or no, or picking from a few options.
Okay, so it's about finding the right balance then, knowing when to provide that open field and when to guide them down a specific path. When would you say it's better to use one over the other?
Well, open-ended questions, those are your exploration tools. They're great for uncovering the unexpected, those aha moments where you go, I never thought of it that way before. But because the answers are more, free-flowing, they can be a bit trickier to analyze.
Right, it's not always neat and tidy data points when you're dealing with those open-ended responses.
Exactly. Now, closed questions, they're a data analyst's dream. Easy to quantify, easy to compare, easy to turn into those nice charts and graphs everyone loves.
So if I'm looking for those quick, clear insights, closed questions are the way to go. But am I sacrificing depth for that ease of analysis?
It's a trade-off for sure. You might miss out on those nuanced thoughts, those unexpected avenues that open-ended questions can open up.
It reminds me of something Kendall and Kendall mentioned. They call the question why the strongest probe, almost like it's this magic word that unlocks deeper levels of understanding.
It's true. Why has this amazing ability to push people beyond those surface-level answers to really get at the reasoning behind their thoughts. It's like saying, okay, interesting, but tell me more. Help me understand.
It's like when you're a kid and everything's a why question.
Hmm.
But seriously, it's about getting to the heart of the matter, isn't it?
Yay.
So we've got our questions, open and closed, but what about the flow of the interview itself? I imagine there's a strategy to it, right? It can't just be random questions thrown out there.
You're absolutely right. It's like building a house. You don't just start throwing bricks around hoping they magically form a structure. Kendall and Kendall lay out three main structures for us: the pyramid, the funnel, and the diamond. Each has its own unique approach.
Ooh, a toolbox of interview structures. Tell me more. Let's start with the pyramid. What's the thinking there?
Picture a pyramid, right? Starts broad at the base, then narrows as it goes up. With the pyramid structure, you begin with those general big picture questions, then gradually hone in on the specifics.
So it's like setting the stage, getting context, and then zeroing in on the details. What about the funnel? Is that the opposite?
You got it. With the funnel, you dive right into the specifics, those nitty-gritty details, and then gradually broaden the scope to see how everything fits into the bigger picture.
Interesting. So it's like starting with a close-up and then zooming out to reveal the whole scene. And then there's the diamond structure. What makes this one stand out?
The diamond structure, it's all about balance. It combines the best of both worlds, starting broad, narrowing down, and then expanding back out again.
Sounds comprehensive,
Yeah.
but probably a bit more time-consuming too, right?
You're right. While the diamond structure gives you the most well-rounded view, it might not be the best choice if you're on a tight deadline.
So it's about choosing the right tool for the job, just like with any project. Sometimes you need that quick snapshot, and sometimes you need the full panoramic view.
Exactly. And sometimes you need to bring even more voices into the mix beyond that one-on-one interview setting. That's where joint application design, or JAD, comes into play.
Ah, yes. JAD. It's like that epic brainstorming session where the magic really happens, right?
Yeah.
So with JAD, we're basically getting all the stakeholders in a room and saying, all right, let's figure this thing out together.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about that collaborative energy,
Yeah.
bringing together developers, designers, users, everyone who has a stake in the project.
And I imagine that leads to some pretty amazing ideas and solutions, right? Having all those different perspectives in the mix.
Absolutely.
Oh.
But it takes a skilled facilitator to keep things on track. It's like conducting an orchestra, making sure everyone's playing in sync.
So who are the key players in this JAD orchestra?
Well, first, you've got your executive sponsor, right? They're the ones championing the project from the top, making sure everyone's aligned with the big picture vision.
They're like the conductors, setting the tempo for the whole session.
Exactly. Then you've got your IS analyst, the tech guru, who makes sure all these amazing ideas can actually be built.
You got to keep things grounded in reality, right?
Absolutely. And of course, you can't forget the users themselves. They're the heart and soul of the whole thing.
Their feedback is pure gold.
Exactly. And then to keep the whole thing running smoothly, you need a skilled facilitator, someone who can guide the discussion, keep everyone engaged.
Oh, like herding cats sometimes, I imagine.
Huh. Sometimes it can feel that way, but when it works, it's magic.
So what would you say are the biggest advantages of using JD? What makes it stand out from those individual interviews?
Well, in today's world, everyone's short on time, right? JD is great for efficiency. Get everyone in one room, hash things out, and make decisions faster.
Cutting through the red tape, so to speak.
Exactly, but it's not without its challenges. You need buy-in from everyone involved. If even one person isn't fully on board, it can really throw things off.
So JAD might not be the right fit for every project then. What are some other ways to gather those user insights, especially on a larger scale?
That's where questionnaires come in, those trusty surveys we see everywhere.
Ah, yes, questionnaires. They can be incredibly useful, but I'll admit I don't always enjoy filling them out. It can feel a bit like taking a test sometimes.
Huh, I hear you. But designing a good questionnaire, it's an art. It's about crafting those questions carefully, using clear, concise language, and making it, dare I say, enjoyable for the person filling it out.
Okay, I like that. But how do we take those subjective opinions and feelings, the I loved it or it's just okay, and turn them into something we can actually analyze, something measurable?
That's where scaling comes in. It's how we take those abstract feelings and give them a numerical value so we can compare and measure them.
Okay, so break it down for me. What exactly is scaling and why is it so important?
Imagine you have a stack of questionnaires, all filled out. How do you make sense of all those love it, hate it, meh responses? Scaling gives those responses a number, a way to quantify them.
So it's like translating feelings into data points.
Exactly, and there are different types of scales, like nominal scales, those are for categories like gender or department. Then you've got ordinal scales for ranking things.
So it's like saying, I like pizza more than tacos. But we don't know how Sa&D Ch more you like pizza.
Exactly. Then there are interval scales, where the differences between the points are meaningful, like temperature. And finally, the ratio scale, which is like the VIP of scale.
VIP. Tell me more about this VIP scale.
The ratio scale, it has it all. Equal intervals and a true 0 point, like height and weight. This allows us to do some really sophisticated analysis.
It's amazing how much thought goes into designing these questionnaires. With all this talk about scales and numbers, it's easy to forget there's a human being behind all that data, right?
You're absolutely right. Data is a powerful tool, but we can't let it become the only voice in the room.
Right. It's about finding that balance between the numbers and the human stories behind those numbers.
Exactly. And that's something Kendall and Kendall emphasize too, the importance of validity and reliability in questionnaire design.
Can you remind us what those are again?
Of course. Validity means your questionnaire is actually measuring what it's supposed to measure. Are you asking the right questions to get the information you need?
Making sure you're hitting the target, so to speak.
Exactly. And reliability, that's about consistency. If you give the same questionnaire to the same group at a different time, will you get similar results?
So you're looking for that consistent compass pointing north, not one that's spinning you in circles.
Exactly. We need both validity and reliability to be confident in our data. Otherwise, it's just noise, right?
It's been quite a journey today, exploring the world of user interviews, questionnaires, JAD sessions, all these different ways of getting inside the user's head. Any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that technology should work for, not the other way around. And the only way we can make that happen is by truly understanding the people who are using that technology.
It's about designing with empathy, right? Putting ourselves in the user's shoes.
Exactly. And by using tools like user interviews, questionnaires, and JAD, we can create technology that is not only functional, but also enjoyable to use.
Well said. And with that, we've reached the end of another deep dive. We'll see you next time for more explorations into the world of tech and innovation. Thanks for listening, everyone. It's like we're drowning in information these days, right? Every day, it just feels like more and more.
Yeah, trying to keep up with it all can feel like trying to drink from a fire hose.
And with all that information overload, how are we supposed to know what's actually important, what we should be paying attention to?
Well, that's where knowing how to find those really valuable pieces of information, those golden nuggets you hear about, it really is a skill. Becoming a more discerning consumer of information is key.
It's like separating the signal from the noise. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We've got some excerpts from Kendall SAD9 PPO05 that I think can help with exactly that.
This source is really interesting. It's full of really practical tips on how to gather information effectively without getting totally overwhelmed.
I'm excited to dig in. One of the first things that caught my eye was this idea of unobtrusive methods, which honestly, I wasn't really familiar with.
Yeah, it's a fascinating approach. It's about understanding how people use and share information without them even realizing it.
So instead of conducting interviews or sending out surveys, we're talking about what? Spying on people.
No, not at all. It's more like we're becoming detectives of sorts, but ethically, of course. We're looking for clues in the data people leave behind naturally. For instance, the source talks about analyzing website traffic
Okay, I
patterns.
see where you're going with this. So, like,
Mm.
if we're looking at a website, what are we looking for exactly?
We're interested in things like what pages people visit most often, how long they stay on a page, what they click on. All those digital footprints can tell us a lot about their interests and what motivates them.
It's like I'm picturing someone browsing through a bookstore. You can tell what they're interested in by the books they pick up and flip through, even if they don't end up buying anything.
Exactly. And it's not just websites either. The source also talks about internal memos within an organization. Think about the language people use, what topics they're discussing, even the tone of their emails. It can be really revealing.
Right, so much of what we say and how we say it, even in written communication, reveals a lot more than we think.
Exactly. Think about it. The language and topics discussed in those internal memos. They can offer really valuable clues about the company culture or their decision-making process.
Wow, so we're like flies on the wall, but instead of listening in, we're looking at data. Although this all sounds a bit overwhelming. Isn't there a risk of information overload again if we're trying to pay attention to everything?
You're absolutely right. That's why this idea of sampling is so important. The source is clear, trying to analyze everything, not efficient, and it can be really, really expensive.
So how do we decide what to focus on? It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack sometimes.
Well, think about it like trying to figure out the flavor of a cake. You don't have to eat the entire cake to know if you like it, right?
Yeah.
Just a small slice can give you a good idea of the overall taste.
Okay, I like that analogy. So instead of analyzing every piece of data, we're strategically selecting a smaller portion, a sample, that can give us a good representation of the whole.
Precisely. And there are different approaches to choosing that sample, each with its own pros and cons. The source mentions several sampling techniques.
Okay, so walk me through it. What are some of our options?
Well, the simplest is convenience sampling. It's basically using the data that's easiest to get. It's quick, but it might not always be the most accurate representation of everything.
So that's like asking the first few people you see at a conference what they think about the event. You might get lucky and get a good cross-section of opinions, or you might just get a very skewed perspective.
Exactly. And then there's purposive sampling, which is more about using your knowledge and judgment to select a sample that you think is representative of the whole.
So in that conference scenario, it'd be like making sure you talk to people from different backgrounds, different industries, maybe different levels of seniority.
Yeah, exactly. You're being more intentional with who you're choosing to get a more well-rounded view. And then you have methods like simple random sampling or stratified sampling, which are even more statistically rigorous to ensure a truly representative sample.
Sounds a bit more complicated. When would we know to use those more advanced methods over the simpler ones?
Well, it all comes down to how much confidence you need in the findings. If you need to be super sure that the findings from your sample reflect the larger population, then you go with the more rigorous approaches.
It's all about finding that balance, right?
Hmm.
Between the level of accuracy we need and the resources we have available. This is reminding me of something else the source talks about, this idea that there's even more information hidden in plain sight. It's like we're surrounded by clues, but we just need to know what to look for. It's like we're all amateur detectives and we just need to be a little more observant of the world around us, right?
Absolutely. And the clues are everywhere. Like even something like sales reports can be so much more than just numbers on a page.
Sales reports,
Yeah.
really. To be honest, I've always found them to be kind of, well, boring. I guess it depends on how you read them, right?
It's about going beyond just, okay, this product sold well, and digging into the why. Like, are there patterns in what customers are buying? Maybe even hints about where a product isn't connecting with its target market.
So it's about understanding the story those numbers are telling, not just the numbers themselves.
Right, exactly. And speaking of overlooked sources of information, the source also talks about forms.
Forms.
Yeah.
Like the things we fill out at the doctor's office, those kinds of forms.
Yes. They can be way more revealing than you might think. Think about how forms are designed. They're structured to collect certain information right.
Yeah, so
So the way they're structured, the information they ask for, even the questions they don't ask, it can tell you a lot about how an organization operates.
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, and the source actually lists out questions to ask about forms, like, are there fields that are consistently left blank? Because that could point to a problem with the form's design or maybe confusion about what information is actually important to collect.
So a tiny detail, like a blank space on a form, could actually be a sign of a much larger issue.
Exactly. And this idea of looking at the physical environment, that can be really revealing too.
Oh, for sure. I've always thought you can learn a lot about a company just by walking into their offices. The vibe is different everywhere you go.
It's true. And the source talks about paying attention to things like, how is the workspace laid out? Is it very open, designed to encourage people to work together, or is it more divided with individual offices?
Right. And even things that seem purely aesthetic, like the choice of furniture or the color of the walls, can actually tell you something about the company's culture.
Exactly. It all contributes to the overall feel of a space, and it often reflects the values and priorities of the people who work there.
So to recap a bit, we're not just looking at data in spreadsheets and reports. We're also looking at the physical environment, how people interact with their surroundings, even the design of everyday objects.
And when we bring all these different pieces together, that's when we can really start to get a more complete, more nuanced understanding of what we're looking at, whether that's an organization or a process, even a person.
It's like we're putting together a puzzle. We need all the pieces to get the full picture. And speaking of getting the full picture, this is reminding me of something the source mentioned, this idea of strobe, which I have to admit I'm really curious to learn more about.
Yes. Strobe, from what the source tells us, seems like it's all about bringing together these different observation techniques in a more systematic way.
So it's like strobe is the framework, the scaffolding that helps us organize all these different observations we're making.
Exactly. It's about being intentional with our observations and using a combination of methods to get that full, comprehensive view.
This is so cool. I'm already thinking about all the ways we could apply this in our own lives. But where do we even begin with strobe? Does the source give us any clues about how to actually use it?
Well, it does feel a little like we've stumbled on this treasure map, but we're still missing a few key landmarks to actually find the buried treasure.
Right. The source mentions strobe, but it's more like a teaser than a detailed guidebook.
Okay, but even just a few breadcrumbs can be enough to get us started. What else does the source tell us about strobe?
Well, let's see. Well, there's this intriguing mention of meaningful shorthand symbols.
Meaningful shorthand symbols. Okay, now that sounds intriguing. Like a secret code for detectives.
Right. It does make you wonder if strobe has its own unique language for recording observations.
It sounds like we'll have to do a little more digging on our own if we really want to unlock all of Strobe's secrets.
Definitely. But even without knowing all the ins and outs of strobe, the thing that really sticks with me is this idea of becoming more aware, more conscious of the information that's all around us. I completely agree. It's like this deep dive has given us a fresh set of lenses for looking at the world, helping us see those hidden patterns and connections we might have missed before.
It's about being more present, more curious, and always asking ourselves, what's the story here? Whether we're looking at a company's website, a financial report, even just walking into a room for the first time.
And the cool thing is, these techniques can be applied to so many different aspects of our lives, not just at work, right?
Absolutely. Imagine being able to read between the lines in a conversation or being able to decode the messages hidden in advertising. These observational skills can be incredibly powerful in all areas of life.
So for our listeners who, like me, are feeling inspired to put these techniques into practice, what would be your biggest piece of advice?
Don't just accept everything at face value. Question your assumptions. Be on the lookout for those subtle clues, those hidden details. And don't be afraid to dig a little deeper. You might be surprised at what you find.
That's such great advice. This deep dive has truly opened my eyes to the incredible amount of information that's hiding in plain sight. And while we may not have figured out strobe just yet, it's definitely something I'm going to be exploring further.
Me too. It sounds like it could be its own deep dive sometime.
To all our listeners out there, let us know if you're interested in learning more about strobe. Maybe once we've cracked the code, we can share what we've learned in a future episode. Until then, happy observing, everyone.